We're in the midst of a huge transformation where our peers, communities, and workplaces are all really melding into one. Welcome to Reimagining Company Culture. My name is Christina Giordano, she, her, and hers, and I'm the Senior Partnerships Manager here at AllVoices. Today, I am very excited to welcome our next guest onto the interview series, Dr. Akilah Cadet. She's the founder and CEO of Change Cadet. Thank you so much for being here. If you want to share a little bit about yourself, including your pronouns, and when you were younger, do you remember how exactly you answered the question, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Ooh, that is fun. Yeah, my name is Akilah. My pronouns are she and her. And when I was a kid, I wanted to be a pediatrician.
Oh, I love that. I love that. Did you just really like your pediatrician, or did you have doctors in the family?
Oh no, absolutely not. I don't even remember my pediatrician, but I've just always I've always loved kids. I was a preschool teacher when I was in college
Mhm.
too, and I've been great with them, and I don't know, I thought it'd be a really cool job. I always kind of knew I wanted to be a doctor, but I'm like, a kid doc, I could do that. That'll be fun.
I love that. What would you say, what else defines you as a person, Akilah?
So, I am defined by how amazing I am. It's my mantra, it's my phrase, it's my signature line on emails, it's on sweaters, it's on t-shirts. Yeah, it's on everything. How I keep being amazing. And that's not a statement that's centered in myself or centered in ego. It's just the facts. So I am a Black woman who lives in America, who runs a business, who's also disabled, who gets the joy of major depressive disorder, who's gone through adversity in the workplace, who's created a workplace that doesn't have that. And I live in constant pain, and I work in a place that traumatizes me all the time. Not my workplace, but the work we do with dismantling white supremacy and creating cultures of belonging. So I get triggered easily with process and control, but it's nothing short of amazing that I'm able to do all of these things. So that's me, my defining factor, my amazingness.
That might be one of the best answers that I've received to that question. And thank you for sharing your story and kind of personal journey to this work and everything that you do to create this kind of, sense of belonging within the companies you work with, and also creating the space within your own company too. And I want to talk about Change Cadet and how you help organizations really increase diversity and also support professionals of color once they are at the organization, women, underserved communities. From the past couple of years, I think more people have been reaching out to say, okay, what are we doing? How can we create a long-term sustainable strategy? What are some other patterns you've seen over the past couple of years, and how folks want to engage with you and Change Cadet?
Yeah, so I think it's important to set the stage by talking about how many more companies, businesses, influencers, celebrities, brands have an interest in diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, anti-racism, justice, advocacy, accessibility, whatever acronyms they want to use. They're fine with me. They all mean the same thing. It's all centered in belonging. We've had that uptick since the unfortunate murder of George Floyd, May 25th, 2020. And so we've seen subsequent events that have happened since then where workplaces and people alike want to hold themselves accountable, use their power and privilege for good, and show up in respective spaces. Also remember, we've had Stop AAPI Hate, Asian American Pacific Islander hate. We've had the insurrection. We've had lots of things going on with women's rights, right, and voters' rights, and the list goes on and on and on. So the clients that we typically see and the shift that we've had is more excitement and willingness for folks to want to lean into this type of work and to be able to create, a culture of belonging. So the patterns we've seen, you ready? Performative behavior, one of my favorites, right? So you and I know this so well, but for the listeners, performative behavior is essentially when the actions and words don't match for the person, the brand, the company.
Mhm.
So We did pull up or shut up, like a lot of beauty brands. Pull up or shut up, which is really important. We're going to show you our metrics for how we have white ass leadership, because that's what it is. Just a whole bunch of white people who are leaders, but we're going to hold ourselves accountable. But that's it. That's all we did. Like the accountability was like, we're going to tell you, but actually not taking in the internal efforts. We've also had folks who come in who have already been doing the work, but they need more intentionality, tools, expertise,
Mhm.
and leadership to move the work along. And then the other pattern we see is my favorite, the stop start. Like, oof, we're totally, and no, you know what? Nope, nope, the CEO changed their mind. Actually, no, we really want to, we aren't ready to hire a head of diversity. You know what? So those have been the patterns of how folks are coming in. Either way, we're able to get them into forward momentum,
Mhm.
and we help along with these patterns, help everyone realize that grace and patience are needed in order to get to that place of belonging.
Yeah, that grace and patience is so necessary for this work and to really sustain long-term organizational change too. In terms of the organizations who are ready to have a growth mindset, really change the systems that are in place, and really commit to the work, are there kind of certain ingredients you look to in leaders or kind of non-negotiables in companies that you work with?
Yeah, absolutely. So one is the willingness to learn and unlearn. So what happens when I say you should stop using professional development and stop using all hands? Are they resistant to that, or are they curious? Or does a light bulb come on like, oh yeah, all hands, that's not inclusive for people with disabilities that makes sense, right? Or
Mhm.
professional, that's a coded word. But
Right.
how? Oh, how is that a coded word, right? So right now, for the listeners, I have blonde braids in my hair and done my moi, and they're very cute. Some people may find blonde braids or Christina, your hair, pink hair to be unprofessional,
Yep.
right? But it's not unprofessional. It's part of our identity, it's part of our culture, it's part of celebration, self expression. So when we think about the term professional, it's restrictive and upholds values of white supremacy. So straight hair, my hair is naturally curly. So straight hair is a professional look, although my natural hair is curly, right? So are they open and receptive to learning and unlearning? Who's involved in the conversations with us? Is it coming from a committee? Is it coming from middle manager leader? Because if it's coming from a middle manager leader who doesn't explicitly state that the CEO or COO or chief diversity officer wants us to have a conversation with you, then I already know they are deficient of having leadership buy-in. You can still have opportunities for buy-in, but who's on board with that type of engagement with us? And the other thing is the willingness to change. So we're Change Cadet for a reason. I don't know why the world hasn't figured this out yet, but diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, anti-racism is just change management. That's it.
Right.
Right? And we all do change management. And we all, depending on the type of company, you're rolling out something new, a new process, a new product. So it's all a transferable skill set. But because ego is a big part of this work, it slows down the process. So then we're looking for that willingness to change, that ego check, where people connecting back, right, to learning and unlearning. And so if they have those ingredients along with accountability for themselves, their role, the company, then a lot of beautiful things can happen.
Absolutely. The willingness to change, really coming into this work with humility and empathy and a willingness to learn, and also unlearn too. We were having an earlier conversation about that as well. I think that definitely makes sense in terms of organizations too being kind of microcosms of society. People are talking about this sense of belonging. Are there qualitative and quantitative ways that you kind of think about to say, okay, there is a sense of belonging here, but it needs to be strengthened in this way? Or, yeah, like 60% of folks at this organization say that, they feel like they are part of it, but the rest of the folks that are there, perhaps historically underrepresented or marginalized communities, do not feel that way. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so this is where I get to be the nerd. My doctorate is in leadership and organizational behavior. So when we talk about qualitative data, we are talking about words. We're talking about sitting down and collecting information, either words that are written out, words that are being verbalized, and words are powerful, particularly for those who are intentionally ignored. So folks may know intentionally ignored as marginalized or underrepresented, but intentionally ignored puts the problem on the system and not the person or the people. And so we're saying intentionally ignored, they're hiring us. Some, not all clients, are hiring us because they want to further diversify leadership or their team. And so when we look at, the storytelling that comes from qualitative data, that's a way to tie it back to quantitative data. So I don't know which researcher said, let's have words that sound alike, but the trick is
Right.
quantitative means quantity numbers. So if anyone is ever trying to figure that out, right? So quantitative, we're looking at the greatest hits, an employee engagement survey, a pulse survey that goes out. What are the percentages, like you were saying? What are the numbers? How many workshops has someone gone to? How many departments have participated in X, Y, and Z initiatives and things? And that could get more into KPIs, so key performance indicators. It can get into objectives, it can get into goals. It can get into that area because a lot of companies in particular want something that is quantifiable for change. But here's the thing. Some of it is not quantifiable, which is why we have to really make sure we're collecting qualitative data on a regular basis. So what open-ended questions are on said survey? How are you doing checkpoints with, focus groups? How are you doing, roundtables or all staff meetings where folks can provide feedback? Because that is the way to see if there's a shift happening along with the numbers. So companies need to look at employee engagement survey, whatever you want to call it, your pulse surveys that may happen every once in a while for a big change that's going on. They also need to look at exit interviews. What's the qualitative and quantitative data that's coming out of your exit interviews? And that's a lot more qualitative data. What's happening? Another source of data that folks forget are the annual or biannual evaluation processes. What's coming from there? If you've changed your values to be inclusive, are they being held accountable? And then how does that reflect back onto one of the most important documents? It's either strategic plan or diversity roadmap or diversity strategic plan. Sometimes it's the same, sometimes it's separate, but how does it tie back in there so that there's accountability with the measurements that are being outlined?
Absolutely. That accountability related to the business, the goals. And what I hear you saying too is that it's not just, one open-ended question that managers ask in a one-on-one. It's not just like an annual kind of performance survey there. There's multiple ways because people like to give feedback in different ways to understand how people are feeling, what needs to be improved, what's working well too. Is there any way that you kind of recommend that folks within an organization, like you can have your values set up on a virtual kitchen wall if you want, or like in the employee handbook. But it's really unclear if there are kind of those hidden dangers of toxic managers, people who are not cultivating those values. How do you kind of identify that toxicity within an organization?
So it's always very clear. It's just the choice of upholding values of white supremacy.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll say that again. It's the choice to uphold values of white supremacy. So we all know when there's a problem leader. Let's take ethnicity out of it because race is a social construct. So if the white guy, heterosexual, cisgendered white guy, is leading a department,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a mass exodus of those who identify as women leaving that department, that's a problem. But if they never hold that white guy accountable and he continually gets promoted and eventually becomes a C-suite of the company, the choice was made to keep him there for that thing he did that one time, or maybe he did it twice. That brought in a lot of money for the company, opposed to looking at the overall culture and experience. That sends the message that the women are valued less, they're less than that type of person, right?
Mm-hmm.
In that space. And when we think about toxicity, we're thinking about those types of things. Again, that's why exit interviews are important to collect. We think about opportunities where lots of folks will source and recruit BIPOC folks into a company, and they'll say, no, thank you, even if they get the job offer, because they've demonstrated toxicity or observed toxicity just through the interview process.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's there. So it's really more so moving the fact that what may be viewed as toxic to those in power is different from those that they want to bring into the workforce. So they really have to stop and reflect and understand their power and privilege of how they're coming into the space. Toxicity is something that works really well with overall organizational dysfunction too. So you'll see that if a whole bunch of people get promoted and no one knows why folks get promoted, toxicity. There's favoritism, maybe nepotism that's happening right in that place. And so when folks can identify those things, or they bring someone in like our firm to help identify those things, then they have a choice to correct that behavior, even if it takes time to repair.
Absolutely. We have to be cognizant not to uphold white supremacy and make sure that we are all accountable to interrupting our own biases and also taking a pulse on what's happening within our company, within our relationships as well. I want to talk about kind of getting ahead of it and making sure that people feel like they are psychologically safe and again, not in a toxic environment, but really wanting to make a change or speak up in some sort of way. One of the ways that you could get feedback from or as an organization from folks is anonymously. And some leaders are very hesitant. They think that, we have the best company culture, very high trust environment. People can just come to the chief people officer or whoever, the CEO, and give any kind of feedback. We know that power dynamics and a whole list of other things exist within any organization, but why is it important to really offer that as kind of one of the avenues of feedback?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about how no culture can create a safe culture. It's like impossible to do because what your needs for safety are different than my needs for safety. So what companies can do is create supportive environments.
Mm-hmm.
And so if someone is feeling unsafe, they can report that in a way that protects their safety.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's lots of different ways in which they can do that. So it's really creating supportive spaces opposed to safe spaces.
Mm-hmm.
So being able to provide anonymous feedback is for that very reason. Now, if you are a lonely or an only, so a lonely is one of few BIPOC people on a team or within the company, or the only one on a team or maybe even in the company, if you were to share feedback and there isn't representation of diversity there, you could be the problem. Because no one else is experiencing that, because they don't have that lived experience. They don't have those identities, ethnicities, all of those things that would make it different than dominant culture. I think it's important to note that when we talk about white dominant culture and white supremacist culture, it's one and the same. And that means the folks who have the most power within an organization. I would encourage folks listening as they think about leadership of the organization. Is it diverse? Is it representative? Is there one BIPOC person? Are they all white and there's one LGBT plus person? Is there one woman? Right. Like, what does that look like? And so white supremacist and white dominant culture is to benefit those who benefit the most from that type of culture. Heterosexual, cisgendered white men, privilege, they have the most power. But if it's a white man who is gay, less power. If it's a white man who is disabled, less power, right? Same for a white woman and so forth. So imagine getting down to me, Black, disabled woman. I'm going to have a lot less opportunity for growth, connection, going to the happy hour, the meet and greet, being invited to someone's birthday and so forth, because I'm not part of dominant culture. And so when we think about anonymous feedback, that's actually a way of creating belonging for someone to safely share information, safely put it in a way that puts people in culture, HR, C-suite team, whoever has access to it, on notice of a way to potentially improve something. Now, with that said, even if we think about white dominant culture and white supremacist culture, if a white guy is starting a company and something happens to him that's like unfair, he also may not feel comfortable sharing that in day 24. Maybe day 48, but not day 24. So they also should have the opportunity, right, to share and provide that information. And then when you think about it, the employee engagement surveys that happen every year that most companies do, that's anonymous too. So how is it different from anonymous feedback? Because you're receiving anonymous feedback on the survey, right? So again, that's going back into ego and not wanting to be in a position to learn and unlearn when that feedback is provided. So I always recommend with anonymous feedback channels that there's a way for people to share, to identify themselves if they want to. When organizations are into a position where they are supportive, then maybe there'll be another process for feedback. And there should be, because they'll feel valued and appreciated and feel like they belong in that space. So they'll know directly who to talk to and not feel that they will be isolated, othered, or fired.
Mhm. Absolutely. I mean, I appreciate that those kind of different examples as well, because sometimes it's really kind of hard to think about, okay, how do we create the supportive spaces to do this, and putting language behind that and expectations and playing out these different scenarios are really important because these are the people in your company that you want to hear from. You want to make sure that people are not feeling unsafe at work. In terms of the role of kind of managers and the person that you're working with more so on a day-to-day basis, outside of your people team, HR team, or the executives at your organization, how can we really keep folks, especially new managers or managers who've been managing folks for 10 years, really accountable to having an equity-driven mindset? I know some organizations relate it to performance review, bonus structure. Some people kind of refer to it as kind of training for managers, but I want to kind of ask your opinion on kind of resourcing and how to kind of think about that there.
I mean, all of those things are fine, quite frankly, but really, once values have been set, goals, objectives, roadmap, policy changes have happened, leaders have to role model that behavior for themselves first, and then their teams, and then hold their peers, other leaders accountable. And so as soon as someone delineates from the plan, that allows for permission, going back into choice, that allows for permission for folks to create harm, cause problems, not be open to opportunities for either someone pitching something or being promoted or whatever that thing may be. And so there has to be that shared accountability that has to role model from the top down. Someone could be in an entry level position and do all of the things that the workshop said to do all of the things that are now outlined in the values, but none of that matters because they don't have the power.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how it goes in hierarchical structures. But if the CEO does all the things that they're supposed to do, then you're going to see exits of folks who are toxic, what we're talking about earlier. You'll be either themselves because they're like, I don't want this accountability and their problems, and they leave, or they're fired because they're role modeling that behavior and showing what accountability looks like.
Mm-hmm.
We always talk about with our teams that we work with and the companies that we work with about how leaders should act. And that means accountability, communication, and transparency. How are you holding yourself and others accountable? How are you communicating with your team and with your leaders saying, hey, sounds like a microaggression. So let's talk about this right now. Or let's check in after this meeting to go into that. Or even my favorite, I don't know what's happening right now, but it's inappropriate. So I'm going to stop this conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And then transparency. I apologize for what I said. I did not know. No, we are not going to move forward with these diversity efforts, or no, we're not going to move forward with this program that we outlined because we don't have budget for it. Or my favorite, I'll get back to you. And then they get back to you.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so you may hear that has everything to do with diversity all the way through, or nothing to do with diversity all the way through. But in order to have a healthy organization, those things need to happen regardless of what the subject area is.
Mm-hmm.
So when you have opportunities for apology, when you can role model the behavior that needs to happen, you are following ACT, accountability, communication, and transparency, then you're in a position to constantly learn and unlearn. And that needs to happen regardless of anyone's role, but particularly for those who have the most power, so that the shift that they've paid for, either the consultant or the head of diversity, actually happens.
Right.
Otherwise, we go back into what we talked about earlier, which is performative behavior, where the actions and words do not match.
Absolutely. And we don't want to be performative here, especially when people are actually trying to make an effort. And that self-reflection is so important, asking yourself those questions. And to your point around transparency, taking ownership. If you said something that offended someone, if you are having a conversation and you know that it's not going the right way, stop, pause, take ownership of that. Have this kind of conversation and human kind of moment there, in terms of not putting the kind of onus on the only in the room. And also, we have a lot of conversations around people who are allies of the BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color community. In your opinion, what does true allyship look like in practice? If you could provide an example for folks who are listening.
Sure. Allyship is a waste of time. I personally hate it. I know, plot twist. And the reason for that is allyship allows for comfort. So allyship is, oh, I learned something new because I listened to a podcast, I observed something, I read a book. And so I'm going to practice using my privilege. I'm going to say, hey, that person was in line, or hey, this person was talking in the meeting, so let's go back to that person. All important things. But as soon as we get to something that someone doesn't want to compromise on, where they don't want to be comfortable being uncomfortable, that allyship stops. Ugh, that's too much for me. What do you mean it's Indigenous Peoples Day?
Mm-hmm.
It's always Columbus Day. It's just Columbus Day. So we do. I'm an Italian American. We have traditions. Columbus Day. This is not going to do it too much. Right. And that's the comfort that comes with allyship. I donated. So I'm not a bad person. I donated. Donating isn't bad, but that's not the only thing to do. So it's really about moving past allyship to become an accomplice. An accomplice is someone who is anti-racist. There's no way around it. So if you think about allyship as training wheels on the bike of anti-racism, sure, do that. Forward momentum moving in that direction. But an accomplice is someone who brushes their teeth, they put on their deodorant, and they check their bias and privilege every single day, whether they're at home watching TV or out in the world or in the workplace. They're constantly reflecting on, okay, what is my privilege? Am I being biased in the situation? No, I'm showing up. Oh, hey, I'm the leader here. I can say or do something to stop toxicity or harm that's coming up in the space. So the way I like to explain it is, think of a beanbag chair, the beanbag chair being white supremacy. White supremacy beanbag chair. A white person sits in the white supremacy beanbag chair. They're comfortable. It's also hard to get out of because it's a beanbag chair. So that white person sitting in the white supremacy beanbag chair has their favorite popcorn and pairings, watching their favorite movie, living their best life. Then I, a Black disabled woman, come into the room and I'm told I'm not good enough for the beanbag chair. So I can watch the movie, but I need to sit on the floor. So I sit on the floor and I ask for my popcorn. And although it was complimentary to the white person in the white supremacy beanbag chair next to me, I'm told I have to pay for it. So fine, I pay for it. And then when I ask for representation on the movie so I can see someone who looks like me in the movie, because there's just a whole bunch of white people up there, I'm told I'm being challenging, difficult, angry, hostile, angry Black woman, all the greatest hits. So when we talk about someone moving past allyship to become an accomplice, that's someone who looks around the room, they're like, oh, this Black person doesn't have a beanbag chair. I'm going to get them a beanbag chair today. This disabled person doesn't have popcorn. I'm going to give you popcorn today because I can get all the free popcorn I want, right? And then for the Latina person, we're going to get representation on the movie. And it's just a rinse and repeat of that cycle. So both big and small actions happening on a daily basis. You don't always have to do the big things, but there's things that we all can do every day to make the workplace a better place, but ultimately the world a better place.
There are things that we could do every single day to be accomplices. I love that word. I think that you're right. And also really appreciate the beanbag chair analogy and all the different parts. It clearly made sense for me. And I hope that our listeners take that with them as well.
Now everyone knows I'm for sure born in the 80s. Since it's a real life situation. My beanbag chair was red, if anyone was wondering. So
I love it. I used to have a blue beanbag chair and it was so fun. You mentioned kind of anti-racism, and a lot of organizations have looked to find anti-racist trainers, anti-racist workshops, anti-racist programming. And I want to kind of ask your kind of thought process and kind of philosophy around, is it imperative that every organization has anti-racism programming and kind of works with consultants and subject matter experts to really bring this into the workplace?
well, it depends on the trainer, I will tell you that, and the facilitator that's in there. But I would take it a step back and say, are they ready to have the discussion? Because if they aren't ready to have the discussion, it will create more harm than good. So imagine, again, a lonely or an only BIPOC person in the space, and they're like, okay, cool, anti-racism training is happening. Maybe I won't have to keep telling folks to stop touching my hair, or whatever the thing may be, right? That comes up. And then you have the workshop, and then they're like, these are the actionable steps that you need to do all the time. Your company's going to hold you accountable. And then nothing happens, right? Then that BIPOC person is just put in a situation where they feel that there's going to be opportunity for change, more value and appreciation. They don't get that. And it's the same for, the white person who is already an accomplice as well. Same amount of frustration. So you can have a wonderful opportunity for folks to disengage or be in a position of initiative fatigue and create a runway or pathway to exit out of the company. And so it's really important to make sure if the climate and culture is ready to have a workshop, and then the type of workshop. I don't think anyone should have a workshop that says you're racist. And they exist. Not good at all, because people will shut down. But what are the conversations that can be held? Maybe it's starting with a fireside chat with someone like myself. Maybe it's starting with educational materials. Maybe it's starting with a resource library that a company puts together that has clips of Trevor Noah talking about a subject matter, or an NPR clip, or the full podcast from NPR, whatever it may be. But they're building information. Here, read this book, or maybe we're going to have a book club, or any of those things. And then getting to the point to say, okay, now we're in a position where we are prepared to change the policies, practices, and procedures to match the behavior in which the facilitator or trainer is asking you to do. Now, training is a waste of time. I fucking hate training. I'll tell you that right now. I don't think training works at all. And people are like, but don't you do it? No, we do workshops for people to do the work. And it's always focused on the individual, because I can't determine, unless we have that engagement, I can't determine what's happening in the culture. So I will never put someone in that situation whatsoever. Trainings are do this today and go back into the environment that's not ready for that to happen. Are there times where there can be alignment? Sure. But there's more thought and ideation, development, partnership, collaboration to make sure that those behaviors are being supported. So I would say focus on workshops for individual growth, and then get to the point where those trainings, the behavior trainings, can be reinforced and held accountable in day-to-day work.
Absolutely. Is your environment ready? Being honest and acknowledging where you are as an organization and where you are as a leader, and what can I do to do the work with a capital W to get myself there, to get others there. And I think that's important to remember. You can't fast track this work as well, or just like look to check a box, because you're right, it's not going to work after you do the workshop and people, or you do the training, and then people are not ready to have these conversations, or they feel like nothing was done if you are kind of the only person there as well. Akilah, is there anything that I either didn't ask and you want to share with our listeners, or 1 to 2 kind of insights that you want to make sure that people bring with them?
Sure. I will just say that it's important that you find your voice and use your voice. So for BIPOC people, intentionally ignored, disabled, LGBTQ+, you may or may not have an understanding of your privilege because of systemic issues. Realize that you have that. Realize that the world is changing a bit, and we are still in the period of social justice, reckoning, awareness, and accountability. It could be like a grain of salt in some places, but there's more of that now than before. So do not be afraid to use your voice, or partner with an accomplice that you see in an organization. And a very important reminder to not feel as if you have to explain stuff to white people. Unless that is your job, do not do it. You don't have to be on the committee. You don't have to be a representative of all the Black people in that space, or however you identify. You do not need to do that. So be comfortable with saying no. And then for white people or white passing people, this is important to note. So BIPOC people, Black, Indigenous people of color who look white, so you can benefit from that white dominant culture, make sure that you're holding yourself accountable and you are not afraid to apologize. Apology doesn't mean you're a bad person. Apology doesn't mean you're a racist. Apology means you are an accomplice. And apology means you're moving towards being anti-racist or anti-racist as a result of that. So remember that it can be a little tricky, because you'll be in white spaces and you'll hear things that are deplorable. And as a result of that, you can use your voice too. to correct that behavior, whether you want to do it in the moment or pull that person aside, but do that as well, because it will also make the workplace better for those who do not have as much power, privilege, and opportunity.
Be an accomplice. I love that an apology is not, you saying that you are a racist and that you are not an anti-racist or that you are a bad person. Own up to your actions, your behavior, and really step up, use your voice. I think that's a great call to action. Akilah, thank you so much for being on Reimagining Company Culture this afternoon.
Thank you so much. And to you and everyone listening, keep being amazing.
Thank you. And as a reminder for folks who are listening, at AllVoices, we really believe that employee feedback management as a requirement for the organization to succeed overall. Have a good rest of your afternoon, everyone.